How much time have you spent researching and getting familiar with the different components and the different aspects of what it means to live a life like the one you desire for yourself? Find those holes, find those unknowns, find the uncertainties, find the question marks, and seek information. Seek education, seek to know more. And when you can understand and have that much clarity around it, then you are utilizing your attention.
Welcome, everybody. This is another series in our Human Potential series with Jonny Dupre and Bob Podolsky. Sterling couldn't make it again, and he says he's going to make it to the next one. We'll see. But or maybe else I can maybe I can get him on a separate interview and just have him comment on all the stuff that you guys have covered. Because let me tell you, I've been listening to our previous shows, and you guys are putting out some tremendous content when it comes to advice and good information. I mean, I pointed you guys to a little bit of a clip of Joe Dispenza, and one of the things he said, and it was just about a little 5-minute clip, but it hit on probably 3 or 4 of the things that each of you guys mentioned last week in regard to like our attention and like how do we go about changing. You mentioned insight in regard to like our understanding. Bob, you talked about having a lack of understanding for what it is that we need to change, and him basically saying that's an insight, that's awareness, but you've got to be able to act upon it, which is something that Jonny brought about and pointed out last week. So you guys are meshing incredibly well in regard to your expertise on even what the people in the the mainstream are saying about these problems that they're facing and our society is facing. And so it's just, to me, it just says incredibly valuable. And for those that are watching, if you haven't watched the previous shows, definitely go and watch the previous shows, because it's some really tremendous stuff. With that said, you guys have both been doing workshops and stuff. Let's just get a little bit about what's happened to you in the last month since we talked last time. So Jonny, you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, I'm blessed to be connected to a mentor and a teacher and a guide who's been there to support me over the sort of latter half of my career, who's been really with me for the last 10 years. And as a result, I have the opportunity and the pleasure of being able to offer a certification training program in what's called Ericksonian hypnotherapy, which is built and based off the work of Milton H. Erickson, a phenomenal doctor who really revolutionized how we can combine communication and language and consciousness to help facilitate a transformation or a change in another human being. And I ran a 2-week course for my mentor at Hypnosis Training Academy and taught it on specifically Erickson's principles when it comes to creating transformation, both within direct languaging and indirect communication, as well as the power of storytelling and metaphor when it comes to shifting and learning different ways we can evolve ourselves and our lives. So I was super blessed to be able to take some amazing students through that program and get them certified.
Awesome. How about you, Bob? You had a workshop yourself.
Yes, I did a 2-day workshop, which is an introduction to technology that I call soul bonding, which is an educational protocol rather than clinical. It combines cognitive therapy, Gestalt therapy, Jay Haley's strategic therapy, bioenergetic therapy, neurolinguistic programming, and Ericksonian hypnosis. And I had 14 people attended that, and they were all very excited and happy about it. So we're going to go on and do another training, this time a 6-month program, which will be comprised of 7 2-day workshops. And people are already kind of lining up for it. So it'll be once a month for 2 days, spanning 6 months, which means 7 workshops. And I'm in the middle of putting the detailed designs together. And I've got a number of people going to help me with the promotion of it, because promoting isn't my forte. But I have several people working with me for whom it is their forte. And exactly following what you just said, Johnny, we're using basically what amounts to an equity sharing business plan. And everyone involved stands to make money from it. And we already see that the information is very well received by the people who've already received some of it. And so we're going to create our own training program, and we're going to create an army of soul bonders. And I'm very, very excited about it. And I have several other locations that are interested in doing something similar. I have one in Boston, one in Arizona, and another one in Australia, of all places. So I may be doing some traveling, and I may be doing a lot of time juggling to fit everything in. But I couldn't be more excited that people want change, and they're willing to make changes in themselves in order to bring about changes in the world around them. And I really see that as the only strategy that has any hope of making a real difference. So that's what I've been up to.
Awesome, Bob. So the topic for today's interview is the psychology of fear. And
Fear.
Johnny, this is really your episode. So where do you want to take us?
Well, I think the first thing we should do is we should talk about what fear actually is when it comes to consciousness, and discuss the fact that it actually comes from the exact same mechanism that allows us to be successful. And that is that we have, when one develops this big, beautiful front brain of ours, this neocortex and this prefrontal cortex, we develop the ability to really focus on time. Time is, to me, a man-made concept. You know, I don't see too many cheetahs walking around wondering where their wristwatch is as they go hunting for the day. And so for me, I think that one of the reasons that we developed our ability to look at time is so that we could demarcate change in a way that we can plan around it, or give it an extended sense of purpose, consistency, and constancy. So our ability to look into an imagined future allows us to prepare for and plan for success. If we want to end up at a certain destination, that requires that we develop a pathway to get to this destination. We want to be able to get to purposefully plan to get to a perspective or a place where we can see the land and then map a route, knowing that the path when we come down off the tree and actually start to walk the pathway, that may not look the way it looked when we were way up on the tree, but it does allow us to plan for it. Well, that's sort of planning a future that may not ever come to pass, but allows us to develop a set of steps or a procedure or a process by which we can judge the probability more accurately towards something successful. Well, that same mechanism that allows us to look into the future and place an image or a mental movie out into that future in order for us to move towards it to be successful is the same mechanism that, if we put something negative into it, incites fear within us on a future that is just as uncertain for the positive as it is for the negative. Because we don't really know until we're there what it's going to actually be like, if it even exists. And so what happens is we have this dichotomy of positive and negative, and of course, lack of attachment or non-attachment, which would be the recognition of presence, and saying whatever could come in the future is as uncertain as anything else. And we may not choose to do either one. And we choose to just stay now and not actually use that same mechanism to plan for it. So for me, fear can be turned into false expectations appearing real, which is we look into the future and we set it as an expectation of something that will happen, so much so that we make it appear real to ourselves, and we have an actual visceral response to it in our bodies right now. And so that for me is the ability of the human consciousness to believe in our own hype, which is we actually begin to think that what we're imagining will happen. And of course, we need that in order to prepare ourselves for a potential threat or danger. But what happens is it can become irrational, which is we're looking and seeking out what we think are dangers and threats that may or may not necessarily be built on any real evidence. It's created as a part of the story that we have in our own minds. But I would love to hear Bob's thoughts on this, because I know that he's worked with it a lot too.
I am in awe of the way you describe such things. I'm laughing because you seem to bring to the surface a level of detail that I consciously try to avoid.
This drives my girlfriend nuts.
I don't know. Well, I'm saying that because my move is always to take things that are very complex and make them as simple as I can. Your way of going about it is much more like what I've encountered in academia. And I'm sure you have, a lot of academic background to bolster what you've been saying. Academics do this. I mean, even Ed Griffin pointed out years ago, 10 years ago, he pointed out that academics are really good at figuring out all the fine points and details and complications. And that is sometimes extremely valuable. I give you that. It's also sometimes extremely distracting. And so I try
overly complicating, right?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I won't say that is so, but it's certainly one of the possibilities that occurs to me. So my way of dealing with fear as a concept is, okay, having fear allows us to avoid things that are dangerous to us. Humans on the very basic level, we like to approach what is attractive to us and avoid what is potentially dangerous to us. Approach and avoidance. Very simple concept. So in my own personal evaluation of various circumstances, I tend to mentally either calculate or intuit the level of risk and the level of rewards and the probabilities that go with those. And so in 1999, when I saw there was a 50% chance that civilization might collapse due to Y2K, I prepared for it as if it was going to happen. To my dismay, I lost a lot of money that way. A lot of years of accumulated work lost because I saw this 50-50 chance of terrible things happening. Today, looking at the world around me, I think it's worse than 50-50 that something terrible is going to happen soon, maybe by the end of the year, and it'll be catastrophic. And so I start thinking in terms of how to best use the time I have. And this is one of the things pointed out again and again by philosophers and even movie makers, Gandalf saying, Frodo, all we can really do is figure out what to do with the time we are given. And so I see us in that situation today. And fear, I think it's valuable in terms of assessing risk, calculating probabilities, and making the best decisions we can. So I agree with you that it's a virtue, it's a valuable thing, having fear. At the same time, there are fears that, as you have pointed out, are not rational, exaggerated fears, phobias, in fact. And I see the entire concept of character structure now. I've come to see that as a form of phobia. You have some early traumas installing some very powerful phobias that give you amnesia and create all kinds of difficulties in your life. But it all comes down to a kind of phobia. Well, as you know, the neurolinguistics gives us a phobia cure, and it's a very, very powerful tool. In fact, if one misuses it slightly, you can actually help someone to eliminate fears that they would be better off keeping. John Grinder used to talk about when he did a demonstration one time of the phobia cure. A woman was afraid of heights, and she couldn't stand on a chair without being terrified, and so he did the phobia cure with her. And during the break, someone came running up to him, John, that woman you did the phobia cure, she's up on the 10th floor walking on the railing around her what do you call it, the thing that sticks out of the apartment. In the hotel, there's this little
balcony, like a little
right.
office. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's walking on the railing. He had to run up there, get into the apartment where she was, the suite, and persuade her to let him reinstall some of the fear that had been eliminated. So there's a balance. It's not good to have too much fear. It's not good to have too little. And so the phobia cure is a very powerful tool, as I'm sure you know. My most recent brush with it was I had a client who at the sight of a hypodermic needle would faint, literally faint. And in 20 minutes, we cured her of the phobia. So she actually was able to have blood drawn with a hypodermic and didn't faint. In fact, she was quite comfortable with it. There was no problem. What I want to see happen is I want large numbers of people to be able to recognize their fears and deal with them responsibly. If it's exaggeratedly high fear, it's a phobia, you lower the fear. If someone is foolhardy and doing things that are stupid because they're ignoring the fear, they need to change too. So I'm very much in favor of creating circumstances where fears can be balanced out and be more servants to us than controllers.
Let me chime in here and
please do.
Put out a little in regard to maybe a common man's approach. You know, as a guy that ran a project as a project superintendent and then project manager, in many cases, just the average person, the guy that's doing the work, a tradesman, you know, doing a plumber assistant job or working on a tractor or something like that, you know, there's quite a few fears that go into place on a daily basis that people may or may not assess correctly. What the boss might think about stuff, if the boss is going to fire me if I do this, it might be a good idea to do, but maybe it's not. Maybe he'll get mad at me. The last time I tried something, he didn't like it. There's a whole bunch of fear going on almost on a daily basis, and then you add in kind of the high school environment of the social atmosphere, and people can surround themselves with so much fear in so many different ways that it is really useful to know the difference between irrational fear and then also how to deal with fear in a positive way, that people can see if it's something that's real or if it's something that isn't, because many people will live an entire life fearing something that is irrational.
For me, just to speak to both of those things, because those are two amazing prompts, Michael. One of them being how does one determine what's rational? How does one determine what's a threat? Because a threat or a danger to one is not a threat or a danger to another. And so each of us has to determine what that looks like. And for me, it's by understanding what your skills are. What are your skills? What are your talents? What are the tools that you have available to you in order to deal with a threat? One of the things that I do is combat training. And because I'm in combat training 3 days a week, the things that used to be dangerous or threatening to me no longer stimulate a fear response at all. Because to me, it's no longer as much of a risk. Now, is there still a risk there? Sure. Is there still dangerous situations? Sure. But they don't, because my skill level is ready to meet that, the danger level seems to subside. So for me, rational depends on one's ability to recognize the skills, the habits, or the actions one has taken to develop the experiences and the knowing that if a danger like that was to present itself, I can meet it. And I know I can meet it because I've put the time in and the effort in to develop the skills, qualities, attributes needed to meet that particular danger. And so rational really does depend on who we're talking to and what has been the context of their lives. What are their previous traumas and what is their association or relationship to those traumas? If they've gotten over them by taking actions, say working with a gentleman like Bob or working with somebody like me, then they have inner skills that are now a part of them, that it brings the danger level of what had been perceived as irrational back down to what it actually looks like. And now it's, quote, rational. But I can't be the one that looks at another human being and says, that's irrational. Irrational to whom? Am I the judger then? Am I the great wise God that gets to tell people what's rational and irrational? My ego is not that big. Okay, so that for me is sort of the answer to the first prompt is really rational needs to be on behalf of the judgment of the individual experiencing the fear and the difference between who they are right now and who they want to be, or what situations they're not able to face right now that they'd like to. And from that knowledge, then they can determine what will be rational or irrational according to their desire. But that's just my take.
I have a take on it too. It's a little different. I agree with most of what you said. And I've also noticed that very frequently when people have a phobia that is obviously irrational, they're very attached to it. And their reasoning, if you approach them from a cognitive place, as you seem to be suggesting, we're going to decide what's rational and what's not. From a cognitive place, the reasoning goes something like this. Well, I'm afraid of heights, but if I lost my fear of heights, I'd probably be going to all kinds of dangerous high places, and I'm terrified of that. You understand? It's a circular reasoning, and it doesn't really give them much of a handle on what those observing them would regard as rational, and it certainly doesn't always serve them well when they would be better off without that what I consider irrational. I don't tell them what's rational or irrational, but I do notice my own opinions of such things. What I have found to be very helpful is to get the person's subconscious mind to review their history and to notice that the threats that were imminent when they were infants and toddlers no longer apply. It's a change of perspective that they can induce hypnotically or even neurolinguistically with just a few suggestions. Their subconscious mind will say, okay, give me a minute. And of course, the subconscious is very fast. And so you don't have to wait 10 years for them to figure this out. 20 seconds is usually enough. They do a quick review of their experience, and the subconscious basically says, oh, here's a whole bunch of fears I have that I don't need to attend to anymore. I'm going to stop responding to them the way I used to respond to them. This turns out to be a very powerful technique in terms of giving people the opportunity to simply change their vantage point. You know, you talked about being up in the trees and seeing the landscape, and coming down on the ground is a little different. Oh my gosh, the predators can get to me when I'm down here. Yeah, a lot of that change can happen spontaneously just by asking the subconscious to review the history and observe certain things. I have found this to be a very powerful, compelling tool in my tool bag. I recommend it to you if you're not already doing it, that you might consider including that in your approaches. So,
Johnny, you had a second point. You want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, and Bob's right. I think Bob just moved into the second point and sort of elucidated beyond that. So the first point you brought up was about rationality, and for me, rational is a byproduct of the conscious mind. It's a byproduct of the second system. Okay, for me, once you bridge beyond the development of what's rational and irrational, and you're aware that there is a fear preventing you from getting what you want, then you'll set this desire to then make a change around it. And Bob's right. There is a way to allow your unconscious mind to take on many different perspectives that will allow it to remove its own fears, or at least to reset the bandwidth by which one determines what can be fearful, what they should be fearful of versus not fearful of. And that is one technique. But not everybody in the world has access to guys like Bob and I. And so I came up with a lot of different ways that I've noticed people deal with their fears apart from therapists and coaches. And so I sort of have 7 ways that I've witnessed people meet their fears and transform them on their own without the need for help. If that's something you think might be useful, Michael.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. Yeah, let's hear him.
Okay, so
Bob, you got anything you want to say before that?
I would like to see that outline. I don't need to see it handed out piece by piece audiovisually, but if I had an outline of it, I'd grasp it right away.
Instantly. With your background, no problem. Okay, so here's what I noticed. The first one I call the blowout, which is if your fear that you're experiencing in your life as a phobia is at a level 6, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, it's at a level 6. And you go and do something that is a level 9, even if it's not the thing that's at a level 6. It's a completely different context, but you do something that is considered a level 9 and you go all in. It's going to blow out your fear mechanism because you're overshooting it. And so I see social freedom people do this. They're like, I'm scared of a ladder, so I'm going to go jump out of an airplane. And they blow out the lesser phobia, the lesser fear, the ladder, by doing something way outside of the norm. Okay, and I call that for lack of a better term, my fuck it. It's my fuck it method. It's like they just get to this place where they're like, I'm so done experiencing this fear. Fuck it, I'm going all the way. And they just go for something really outlandish, and it blows that thing out. Cool. So that's the first thing I've noticed people do. Social freedom experts who bring 3 people, 4 people, 5 people together, who experience things like approach anxiety and walking up to people and starting conversations at events or something like that. They'll go and have them lay in the street. You know, they'll go and have them do this outlandish stuff in order for their previous fear to just get annihilated. Okay? The second one is I actually use doubt on itself. So most of the time, people experience doubt as a detriment. It's something that prevents them from doing things in their life. A lot of people do paralysis by analysis because they're just sitting there analyzing and doubting that what they're going to make a choice around is going to work. And so I figured that doubt could actually be used on fear. So if you start to think this bad thing is going to happen so much that you begin to believe it's real, well, what happens if you doubt it? What happens if you doubt your fear? If you doubt your fear, you doubt it long enough to realize that it may not be real, and then you go and test it and find out it's not, and then suddenly you're in a different space. So actually learning to use that same part of your mind that loves to doubt on itself then changes the whole mechanism behind the fear, and you actually leave space open to discover what could be. Cool. So that's the second one I notice people do. The third one is differentiation, which is the recognition of the difference between what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm smelling, what I'm tasting, what I'm feeling, and the story I'm putting to it. So if you can differentiate the difference between danger and fear. Dangers are real. A lion who's hungry, that you are in a tent near his hunting grounds, that's a real danger. But if you're looking at a lion in a magazine, not the same danger.
Right.
But you can see the image of it and tell yourself the story, it might as well be the same thing. And so you end up experiencing that fear. So being able to actually use your mind to differentiate between what's really dangerous to you and what's not. Recognizing the story you're adding to it. I've noticed that helps a lot of people too, is being able to differentiate for themselves. Well, for me, I'm a big believer that all change happens unconsciously first. And the neuroscience happens to back up that thought. So I'm a big believer that all of this learning starts with the understanding. But if you can understand the differentiation because somebody shared that with you, or you read a book on it, or you read an article on it, or you listened to a TED Talk on it, you now have it available to you within your unconscious mind to be able to use that if you're so inclined. Okay, so these are just things I've witnessed and noticed people do. Okay, the fourth one is play. When I look at children, they conquer challenges in huge ways through nothing but pure experimentation. They just try different things, and sometimes they fall, sometimes they hurt themselves, but generally speaking, if they want to conquer that thing more than the pain, they'll brush it off, get up, and go at it again.
They learn to walk.
That's right. And climb the monkey bars, even though the monkey bars are to a 4-year-old is really high off the ground. They'll conquer these jungle gyms that are potentially dangerous. Yeah. And yet they'll go back at it again and again and again, even after they've fallen many times. Okay, so for me, I don't see curiosity, childlike curiosity, and fear living in the same space at the same time very often. So it's for me, that childlike curiosity, or you could call it wonderment or awe, leads one to say my desire to do that thing is bigger than my fear of what could happen if I do. And so they'll just keep experimenting and playing with it until they find their way through it. And I think there's a beautiful quote, and I don't know who this quote is by now, it's slipping my mind, but if you have a big enough why, you'll figure out the how. If you want something bad enough, you'll keep trying until you figure that out. And so for me, that's the fourth, is really play. The fifth that I noticed is breaking down one's fears into baby steps so that you develop little victories, little wins on the way to the big thing that you're wanting to complete. So for example, the first time I got offered an opportunity to speak on stage in front of 1,000 people, that was a pretty scary idea. Okay, and so what I did is I decided I was going to go to Toastmasters and do these little tiny talks in front of 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, and then as I continued to do those and gain feedback and learn, I developed little wins. And then I started to do work, started giving talks in front of 50 people and then 100 people. And then over time, I got to this place where it was like the 1,000 people didn't seem that scary to me anymore, because I took that big experience and broke it up into little chunks. And I built my wins into a momentum where once I got to the big stage, I went, this is no different than all the other times I've done this. So just offer my heart, and whatever I can will come out. And I got to trust that. But I had those wins worth trusting. So that was sort of the fifth way I've seen people really do that. Other people call it desensitization, which is they're going after the small fears first, and then they incrementally build up, which I've loved watching a lot of people do that. It's a super good technique. The sixth one is developing confidence in your ability to deal with what would or could happen if the fear actually does come true the way you envision it will. Which is, I go and approach a multimillionaire because I want to work for his company. I'm going to walk up there and I have confidence that even if he rejects me, I'm going to be okay. And I'm going to learn from the conversation and I'm going to grow from the conversation. So my confidence is not in my ability to get a good response. My confidence is in my ability to learn no matter what happens. I'm going to grow and explore and discover and become a better version of me until the next time I get to approach another potentially life-changing interaction or conversation. And so the confidence is more of what we would call an out frame. It's a bigger frame than the thing that you're afraid of. It's like, I trust myself to learn over time. And so it's not about this one interaction. It's about all of the interactions I'm going to have that will lead me to be ready for the one that will ultimately matter for my life. Okay. And then the final one, the seventh one, is just plain pure optimism. It's just plain positive thinking. It's looking at the future and saying that something good is going to happen. And when you do that, you're overwhelming your fear with your belief in the universe. And some people can call that faith. Some people can call that trust in themselves. Some people can call that relentless determination. There's a lot of names for it, but there are individuals that are just so optimistic, they don't experience fear the same way in the same context as other people. They just believe something good will come out of it. God will take care of me, or the earth will take care of me, or I've been really great in my life and karma's going to get my back. And so they just have this overwhelmingly positive affect. And because of that, fear just doesn't take hold in the same way on those people as it does in some other people I've noticed. So those are sort of the 7 ways that I've seen other people deal with their own fears apart from a coach or apart from a therapist, and just listening to them talk about how they changed themselves to meet the thing they had been afraid of. So I hope that's useful.
I like that a lot. That's very illuminating in my mind, what you just described. There is another piece that I would like to kind of throw in the pot here, and you're welcome to use it. I'm trying to think of a good way of explaining it because it's a little bit subtle. I have realized a few years ago that I am immune to insults. There was a time when I was really intimidated by other people's opinions of me. I was really into being the good boy, the obedient child, and other people's opinions mattered. I discovered a few years ago that I am now immune to insults. And the thing that I do about insults is something like what you're describing about fear. When someone tells me something that I would formerly have thought was insulting, I ask myself some questions, and I've got it down to where it's automatic. I don't have to consciously do it anymore. But the first thing is this person telling me something about me or about them? If they're telling me something that is a thought of theirs, it's just something going on in their head, has nothing to do with me. What else might it be? Well, there might be some useful feedback in there and what the other person observes and thinks, but it's still just what goes on in their head. If somehow they have an emotional response to me, and their way of dealing with that response is to say negative things about me, I've noticed it always begins with a statement starting with the word you. You are a dumbass. You are stupid. You are this. You are that. Always. And I realize they don't know me. They're really describing something going on in their head. They should be saying, I think you're a dumbass. I think you're stupid. I think you're this. I think you're that. And it's still, no matter what it is, it's just a thought in their head. How can I be insulted by what's going on in someone else's head? I'm not. And so when people attempt to hurt my feelings or to say judgmental things about me, I always recognize it instantly, sometimes before the words are even out of their mouth. I know they're just telling me something that's going on in their experience. And it doesn't bother me a bit. Why would it bother me to know that some crazy idea is coursing through your brain? It's not going to bother me. And so when I have a client, for example, tell me, oh, well, I have some criticism of you, but I don't want to tell you, it might hurt your feelings. I say, go ahead, please, hurt my feelings, if you can. And the fact is, it can't. I'm immune to having my feelings hurt by anything that someone's going to say to me. In the same way, I can be immune to things that attempt to instill fear in me, because I know my place in the world. I know myself really well. And I know what my limitations are. I know the risks that I take. And so I don't accept other people installing fear in me when I don't need that fear. It's not serving me.
And see, for me,
Bob,
Bob,
referred to.
sorry, go ahead, Mike. If it's okay, Michael. For me, Bob, that falls under the fourth thing that I found, which was differentiation.
Okay.
You're going, that fear's not real. That's in their head. That's
Right.
a story. That's not an actual danger to me. And so as a result, I just differentiate that out and I go, that's your story, not mine.
Exactly.
And so, yeah,
Exactly.
I would agree. And a powerful technique.
Very
Being
powerful.
able to just recognize it's like, listen, you've got the meanings you make out of life and I've got the meanings I make out of life. And I look at your life and see what your life is like and I don't want your life. So you can keep your opinion to yourself. That's fine. I don't want to be like you. So
I'm amused. I'm amused when other people presume to tell me what's going on in me when they really have no idea at all what's going on in me. And I laugh at that. You know, people, I did this in a workshop recently. I said, come on, insult me. And I had half a dozen people attempt to. And each time they did, I would just share my response to it and everyone in the room would laugh. It was ridiculous to think that someone could insult Bob Podolsky. When people,
Well, you know, this refers to essentially, both of you are referring to, and Bob, you specifically referred to as a map.
yeah,
These are kind of, to me, I think what I'm getting out of this is you're effectively saying, here's some maps to how to deal with fear in a way that you can program those into your mind and essentially just make your subconscious go through those motions before you're even conscious of the stuff. Once you get to the point that you're confident and have the faith that those things will work, you don't even need to know. And so there's a bunch of different techniques, and of course you've outlined 7, and Bob, you've outlined another one that kind of fits within that.
fits number
But
4.
there are those, there's probably many others, and
I've
it
got
really
number 4
depends on each person's own map. They can create a map that has 6 of these or 2 of these or 1 of them or whatever. Go ahead.
Good point. I agree. I'm glad that you can see it that way. And I like the reference to my talking about the map and the territory, because the map is never the territory. And this is one of the reasons why so-called flat earthers and rational scientists and a few other people of similar ilk, they're really crazy because they keep insisting that somehow they're dealing with the real thing, the territory, when in fact they just have a different map than I do. And they don't like being confronted with that. They get irate. I've run into this too. So I really appreciate.
Well, but don't you? That's just another fear. I don't know, if, Johnny, if you feel the same way. Is it just another fear that they have that they not necessarily identifying correctly, and so it's just transferred to something else. It's something that they can't.
Well, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that.
For me, it may not be a fear. It may be anger. And what it is that they have a series of beliefs, and they're angry that you are attempting to place your ideas on them as a truth in the situation you're in. And so it doesn't appear as fear. It appears as anger because you've crossed a boundary of theirs, likely that you're unaware of and they're unaware of. So you've stepped over a boundary and now they're angry and you're sitting there going, wait a minute, we were just having a hypothetical discussion. I was just sharing my opinion or my point of view and now you're yelling at me. Like, it's like, whoa. I wasn't intending to step over some boundary of yours, but now you're like yelling. and so I often look at them and I go, I'll ask one question in the middle of that. I'll go, do you think that I'm trying to make my truth your truth? And oftentimes I get the word yes. They'll go, yes. And I'll go, not my intention. My intention actually was just to share what my truth is.
What if it was my intention to induce or incept into their mind a new idea that they obviously haven't assimilated yet? Would that be somehow criminal? Would I be harming them by that? Do they not have defenses against that are absolute?
No, they have defenses. The key becomes whether or not whether or not they ascribe your desire to influence or incept, to use your word, to be inceptive as an attack. And if they perceive it as an attack, they can very much throw defensive walls up and block it. So I think it just depends on the openness of the individual.
I see the decision that they're under attack as distinct from feeling attacked.
Got it.
We are, as you know, I know you know this, we are conditioned from early childhood to feel attacked under certain conditions, when in fact we're not being attacked. It's one of those number 4 things you were talking about.
The differentiation thing, yeah.
Yeah, I think I like that. I like that a lot, that conceiving of that as a differentiation exercise. And I see it. I totally see it. I think it's very.
All right, we're closing in on our time frame here, so I want to try and conclude. But one of the points that well, number one, is there anything left that we need to talk about, Johnny, that you wanted to talk about? But I also wanted to touch a base on one of the things, and it's now escaped my mind, so I'll just let it go to you, Johnny.
The biggest thing that I feel like I want to mention, because basically speaking, we've sort of spoken about ways that people could change, and we've spoken about how to be self-aware enough to look at yourself and say, what story am I adding to my experience that's creating this visceral fear within me, is the final thing, which is, what do you want? What do you want that's more than your fear? Because if you develop a desire that you are very emotionally connected to, then any of these techniques can work. Or you can use any combination of them all, or fuse them all, or come up with your own, because the principles are there. But what gets us to actually do it is a motivation of some kind. And it has to be something we actually desire, that we can feel in our bodies. Because it's nice for somebody to say, I want $1 million. And it's another thing for somebody to be absolutely driven towards it, which is I am willing to sacrifice a great many things in order to have this. Because I often speak of my clients when they tell me what their goal is, and I go, what are you willing to sacrifice in order to have it? And they go, what do you mean? And I go, well, to gain something is to lose what was. To gain what can be, one has to let go of what has been in whatever capacity that may look like for them. Whether it's, this is what I used to know, this is what I want to learn to know, well, then I have to let go of knowing, of thinking that this knowing is the totality of truth long enough to discover something more. So I often phrase that in the form of sacrifice, because sacrifice as a word for me has a connotation to an emotional, visceral release and not the intellectual ideation of a letting go.
I would relate it to price. You want that outcome?
Price you pay.
You're willing to pay the price.
Mm.
Because I think that that's a metaphor that people are very familiar with rather than that of sacrifice. These days.
Yeah, and for me, when I mentioned price to some of my clients, I ended up running into all of their belief systems and structures around money and value and price. And then I went, oh, I'm slamming into this when their fear or their sense of identity, they don't naturally put a price on. And so that's why I changed from calling it price, because I did that for about 2 years, to sacrifice.
That's interesting. I still would go with price, but I can see where you would, with some people, you'd run into that, and you'd have to have a powerful way to deal with it in order to help them over that hurdle.
Yeah, and what I noticed is that some of my most of the clients that I ended up working with had children. And I could,
yeah.
And so I didn't get them to say, what price would you put on your child?
Right.
That they wouldn't let that compute. I said, what would you be willing to sacrifice
for them,
for your child?
Right.
And now I have a gateway that I could help them build that connection.
Good leverage. Good leverage. I've found that the more I focus on people's relationship to their children, the more leverage I have in persuading them that there's opportunities for them to change beneficially.
Mm.
And
yeah.
In fact, the workshop that I just did in Tepoztlan and the training group that I'm going to build there, that came out of an Anarchapulco workshop that I did that specifically addressed a room full of parents who wanted to improve the lives of their children. And it was a very well received workshop. I did a presentation to 30 people. I didn't get on the main stage. I did a presentation for a group of 30, and 12 of them showed up in the workshop. That is a huge closing rate if you think of it in sales terms. 12 out of 30, that's a big percentage of people saw the connection, related to it on a heart level. I really love my children. I'll do anything to improve their lives. And they came to the workshop. Out of that came the impetus to do what I'm doing in Tepoztlan, which now has the potential to reach many more people. So I'm really excited about that. And I appreciate what you've been saying, Jonny. I think you're right on in all of these things. If our circumstances were a little different, I think it would be really interesting for the two of us to put on a joint long workshop. I have given workshops up to 3 weeks long, residential, everyone under the same roof for 3 weeks. I attended such a workshop.
That's intense.
That's
intense.
It was called a 3-week intensive. And it was a life-changing experience for me to participate in one of those. And subsequently, I actually put on 2 of them, where I had enough clients who decided they were committed to their growth and could afford to put aside 3 weeks of their life with no family responsibilities, no job responsibilities. They had to step out of all of that for 3 weeks, and they did it. And every one of them told me they couldn't do it. And I suggested, well, do this experiment, decide you're going to do it first, then figure out how. because otherwise you're trying to figure out, you're making the decision based on knowing how. It's not going to work. You'll never do it that way. But just decide first that you are going to do it and see if you can figure out how. And they did.
Yeah, well, that's indecisiveness is another one of those elements of fear. And I think there's actually a decidophobia. It's one of the phobias that I think a lot of people suffer from. It's interesting, Johnny, that you use really a difference in terms of the words. Something that you mentioned in earlier shows in regard to the language that you use and how to get people to feel the things that you want them to feel, and how the system uses the words to get them to do the things that they want them to do. It is really the words. I don't know, you can have a final comment, and I guess we'll close it out for the day because we're at our time limit.
My final thought for everybody that's listening right now it is going to play more into what Bob said, and that is, let's get simple. How much time are you spending actually focused on what it is you want? How much clarity have you developed around your desires? How much time have you spent researching and getting familiar with the different components and the different aspects of what it means to live a life like the one you desire for yourself? Find those holes, find those unknowns, find the uncertainties, find the question marks, and seek information. Seek education, seek to know more. And when you can understand and have that much clarity around it, then you are utilizing your attention in a direction that will fuel your desire or ability to use any of the fear-shattering techniques that we've presented here to ultimately evolve your life by evolving yourself first. And then, I will stress this again, take action. You must take action. The proof you're looking for that you're changing is in the doing of it. So until you can say to yourself, I'm taking a new action now, are you really changing? And how do you know that within yourself? And I don't care if it's a tiny change in your behavior. I don't care if it's a small shift in your discipline, but take an action so that you can show yourself and prove to yourself you are growing.
I have anything to add?
I have one final thing to add. When I run a phobia cure for a client and they lose a fear, for example, I had a client who was afraid of spiders, and we went through the phobia cure using the neurolinguistic techniques. At the end of the phobia cure, the first thing I have to do is I have to introduce the client to the phobic zone. For instance, in that case, I actually opened a jar and put a spider in the woman's hand. Look at that thing. Isn't that beautiful? Oh my gosh, did you know that spiders have knees? We have 2 knees. Insects have 6 knees. Look at the 8 knees. Aren't they pretty? And she looked at it and was fascinated and forgot to be afraid. It set into confidence the awareness that she had changed. At the end of working on a fear, you have to enter the phobic zone. Otherwise, you don't really know that anything has changed. And it's important to know it and be confident in it. So to those who are working on their fears, I say, when you're ready, don't hesitate to step into the phobic zone. That act in and of itself is so transformative. It sets all these things. It's like you take all this very frothy, heady, abstract stuff, and suddenly, boom, it's concrete. It's the woman with the fear of hypodermics is holding a hypodermic in her hand and examining it confidently. The fear of heights steps up on a chair where she used to be terrified, and she feels comfortable, does a little dance on the tabletop or what have you. Step into the phobic zone. That's my advice.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time. Greatly appreciate your attention. You guys are both, you know, amazing, wise, you know, tremendous providers, and you know, greatly appreciate you taking the time. So look forward to the next one. I think we're going to try and talk about ethics, which is the area that Bob had suggested, and I think you alluded to in our last one too as well, John.
I'd love
So
it.
hopefully we can get Sterling back for that. If not, I'm going to try and get Sterling on another feed and just ask him to respond to some of the things that you guys have pointed out to
Cool.
in these, because this has really been a bunch of valuable material, and certainly, you know, what we just covered today is tremendous, you know, because a lot of people, when it comes to fear, this can be physical manifestation, this can be disease, this can be the end of their lives if they let this fear get out of control.
Quite
Easily.
right.
So many people are suffering from things that is really just an embodiment of fears, irrational fears that have been
Quite right.
stoked by the system.
Quite right. Well, thank you for inviting us. I'm really been glad to be here.
I greatly appreciate the opportunity, Michael, to share what I've learned in the short bit of time I have on this rock of ours.
It's awesome, and thank you guys so much. Take
Thanks.
care.